Hi, and welcome to the second episode of the Women in Financial Literacy podcast. I am your host, Jill Harris. So before we get started, I want to state the views expressed today are my own and do not necessarily reflect those of the Commission, the Commissioners, or other members of the staff. Today, I am joined by Sarah Millett, an Assistant Director here in the Fort Worth Regional Office. Sarah is a wife and a mother of two. She works in private practice and has been with the Commission for just over 5 years. Thank you for joining me, Sarah.
Thank you for having me, Jill. I'm very honored and excited to engage in such an important conversation today. And I would also like to reiterate that my views expressed today are my own and do not necessarily reflect those of the Commission, the Commissioners, or other members of the staff.
Great. So today we're addressing the investment basics. It's important to start the series here because we know from the studies that a lot of women do not feel confident with long-term investing, despite the fact that women are statistically better at it. With women controlling more than 60% of all personal wealth in the U.S., it's more important than ever to have this conversation. There's a lot of ground to cover, but we want to prioritize 3 topics. First, budgeting. Second, salary negotiation and career planning. And finally, managing debt. It might not seem like these topics directly relate to investing or in investment products, but understanding these financial basics increase your likelihood of having discretionary income. The more discretionary income you have, the more flexibility you have to invest and explore the different investment options. With the disclaimer that these topics are broad and often overlapping, Sarah, let's talk budgeting.
Thanks, Jill. So budgets are highly individualized, and it's often about determining a balance between your needs, your wants, and savings, and then being able to pay your future self, often through investments. A good rule that people often follow is the 50-30-20 rule. The basic principle is this: divide up your after-tax income and allocate it 50% on your needs, 30% on your wants, and socking away 20% to savings.
Sarah, I really like the 50-30-20 rule as a good first principle. I wanted to start with the budget rules because it's easy to remember and it's a good lens to view our other topics. We will definitely refer back to this later. Let's move on to the topic of female investors entering the job market. Say you're just out of school or training and looking for that first job. What should you be considering?
Okay, a lot to unpack here. First, your job is more than just a salary. Salary is a very important factor, but not the sole factor in assessing an employment offer. Another consideration is workplace benefits like 401k plans, IRAs, or pensions. Each of these can make your path to saving and investing easier.
Completely agreed. Can you give an overview of how each of these benefits work?
Sure. So a 401k plan is an employer-sponsored retirement savings plan that gives employees a choice of investment options, typically mutual funds. They have a tax benefit, and some employers match your contribution. An IRA, which stands for Individual Retirement Account, allows you to make tax-deductible contributions in a separate fund. And finally, there are pension plans, sometimes also called defined benefit plans. And that is where employers sponsor the plan's investment and then provide you with a monthly benefit upon retirement. The important thing with a lot of these benefit plans is that you can set up automatic monthly contributions from your bank account, and then you get the benefit of that compound interest over time. If you can, ask your potential employer about the details of these plans before you commit to taking a job.
That's really helpful. I feel like so often the top line salary number wins out. And I know for a lot of people starting out, including myself, you think to invest, you need this big chunk of money that can only come from a large salary. But these benefits you outlined are very important because they help you automatically save and start getting you into those good habits early in your career.
Exactly. So this goes back to the 50-30-20 budgeting rule. If the savings is automatic, it makes putting that 20% away for retirement and investment even easier.
So, any other workplace benefits women should consider and or ask for?
So another one that is very important is student loan assistance. And I know we're going to talk more about debt in the next topic, but student loan payoff is a large part of the budget for beginning investors. This is especially true for women, as women hold nearly 2/3 of the outstanding student debt in the US. Race also plays a factor. For instance, Black women borrow more than their white counterparts, graduating with the most debt at over $37,000 on average, compared to $31,000 for white women and $30,000 for white men. Also important, women can take about 2 years longer than men to repay student loans and are more likely to struggle economically as they do so. In that time, interest accrues. So, knowing that, if you have student debt, it can help to find an employer that has programs to help pay off student loans. This is a major benefit because it directly addresses the 50% needs portion of your 50-30-20 budget and can free up discretionary income for investing and paying your future self.
Yes. And with the increased prevalence of student debt, more employers are making this a part of their benefits package. You mentioned that 50% needs bucket, and that's a great segue to the topic of care. This is a big topic that we are going to dive into in the next episode, but I think it's worth mentioning here how much money care, whether it's health, childcare, or elder care, can really eat up that 50% needs part of the budget. The average cost of childcare alone in the US is roughly $10,000 a year per child and consumes about 13% of family income, which is nearly twice what the government considers affordable.
That's right. So if your employer can offset some of that cost, again, you may have more discretionary income to invest. There are a lot of options out here, but everyone should consider the amount of family leave, sick leave, child care and elder care benefits offered by an employer, including any reimbursements, pre-tax programs, and discounts. Also important are healthcare benefits, including insurance coverage and mental health care benefits. Here's another thing to think about: the role of flexible work schedules. Women are generally the primary caretakers, and the ability to have a flex work schedule can mean that you spend less money paying someone else for that care.
Yes. We've talked about monetary benefits that will assist you in that job, and those are important. But equally important is acquiring a skill set that will help your career trajectory. Having a strong skill set can mean financial freedom, entrepreneurship, choices, etc. Can you talk about job training benefits?
Job training is something that is so important, Jill, especially at the beginning of your career. You should consider how an employer will support you with internal and external job training. This includes attending conferences, paying for specialized trainings or licenses, network event fees, and even financial support with continuing education requirements or graduate school. So, your potential employer may not be able to meet your ideal salary requirement, but if they are willing to invest in you and cover some expenses that will eventually lead to you getting a higher salary and more discretionary income, the offer is certainly worth considering.
Now that we've covered benefit options, let's dive into actually negotiating those benefits with an employer. Salary and benefit negotiation can be extremely difficult, especially for those starting out in their careers. What are your thoughts?
Right. So I think it's important to note the role of gender, especially in the ask gap. A recent study found that women ask for 3.3% less than comparable men. Ultimately, that represents a more than $4,000 difference on an annual basis, and then that perpetuates the existing structural wage gap. Therefore, it's critical that women conduct their own research before salary negotiations. This includes researching average salaries at the company and within your industry and the region. It's also helpful to cold call other companies and industry recruiters to discuss salary ranges and benefits packages to get an idea of the types of packages that might be available. Similarly, you should research people on LinkedIn that have your same job and also cold call them. There's a lot of psychology that goes into salary negotiation, and of course, every situation is different. But a good practice, if you are able, is to really consider the potential offer and what is important to you before negotiating the salary. Instead of automatically accepting a position and then negotiating salary, take time to think about what you want in terms of salary and benefits. Go in with an ideal range for salary, your goal salary, a salary that you're comfortable with, and then a bottom range of what you absolutely need and are worth. Again, think about maximizing that discretionary income for investment. Ask if there's a bonus pool or a profit sharing or stock plan. If there is, ask about the amounts and the criteria for eligibility.
Great point. Learning the skill of salary negotiation is important, and the earlier the better. So we touched on this earlier, but we have to discuss debt. American consumer debt is rising, with the average American household carrying over $5,300 in credit card debt alone. Again, debt is highly individualized and personal, but extremely important.
So if you have a lot of debt that you're trying to pay off, that's less discretionary income that you have for investments. It's important to recognize, though, that not all debt is created equal. For instance, you could have housing debt, like a mortgage, which is expected. Car notes or other high-dollar items that many people finance. There's also credit card debt and student loan debt. It should all really be analyzed differently. A good goal is to prioritize paying off your high-interest debt, especially if that debt does not have any tax benefits. Credit card debt, for instance, often charges high interest rates and penalties if you do not pay on time. As an example, the average annual return of the S&P 500 index between 2016 and 2020 was 13.95%, while credit card interest can run well into 20% or above. Credit card debt should be paid down early and avoided entirely if possible.
That's a helpful way to think of things, Sarah. So we touched on it earlier when we talked about benefits, but how should one think about student loans when looking to invest? Because that's debt too.
Okay, so student loan debt might be different. You should assess the interest rate, which could vary depending on how many types of student loan debt that you have. You might consider whether you can consolidate your loans to get an overall rate. If you have a very high interest rate, then repayment of that portion should most likely be a priority above investment. You should also calculate the amount of interest you're going to pay over the lifetime of your student loan. There are a lot of great resources to help with this, including one on the Department of Education's website. Then you should calculate the amount of money you can earn investing, which is typically between 6 to 7% over the long term, versus using that same amount of money, which you would use to pay off your student debt faster. Consider the amount of compound interest that your investment will earn versus the same amount you will save in interest payments if you put the money towards your student loan payoff.
Sarah, those calculations were extremely helpful. Any other considerations when analyzing student debt payoff?
Sure. So we know that money can be an extremely sensitive and emotional subject for everyone. You should do what makes you feel comfortable and also consider the role of the emergency fund, as well as how having debt makes you feel. That will and should factor into your decision about whether you should invest and at what rate.
Agreed. You should go into investing with confidence. We've talked about big topics here: budgeting, salary and benefits, and debt, all with the goal of maximizing that discretionary income to invest. Do you have any final thoughts?
I just want to acknowledge that discussions and decisions about finances and investing can be very difficult and daunting. It's not something we typically talk about in school. It's not something institutions have typically chosen to educate women on. And money and finance is often viewed as a man's responsibility. So it can feel overwhelming. The key here is to take your time. Do your research, talk to people you trust, and follow your gut. And finally, Jill, just thank you for inviting me to participate in this very important discussion and for all the work that you're doing to increase women's financial literacy.